The dirt in Idaho has a way of looking like old bone when the sun hits it just right. It is a dry, unforgiving landscape in the Nez Perce National Forest, where the hemlocks grow so thick they choke out the light even at noon. I have spent 20 years looking into the holes people leave behind when they vanish, and I can tell you that some places feel like they are waiting for a reason to close in. On October 5th, 2018, the mountains around the Penman Mine decided it was time to take something. Terrence Woods Jr. was 27 years old, a young man with a career in television and a life ahead of him in London. He was not a hiker, he was not a survivalist, and he certainly was not a man looking to lose himself in the scrub of the American West. He was just a production assistant doing his job, standing on the edge of a cliff until the moment he simply ceased to be part of our world. The air that evening was getting thin and cold as 5:30 approached. The production crew for the show Gold Rush was wrapping up a day of filming near the abandoned mine shafts that pockmark the hillsides like open sores. Terrence was there helping with the gear, seemingly fine according to the 12 people standing right next to him. There were no arguments, no signs of a breakdown, just the mundane chatter of a film set ending its day. Then, without a word or a glance back, Terrence set his radio on the ground. He did not drop it in a panic, he placed it there as if he were clocking out of existence. He turned toward the edge of a steep, nearly vertical embankment that dropped away into the dark throat of the forest below. And then he ran. He did not stumble, and he did not fall. Witnesses say he ran with a speed that felt unnatural, his feet hitting the shifting scree and loose dirt with the precision of something that did not fear the height. He went down that cliffside like a deer, moving toward the tree line with a singular, terrifying purpose. The crew stood frozen for a heartbeat, watching his small frame get smaller against the massive backdrop of the Idaho wilderness. They yelled for him, their voices echoing off the rock walls, but he never looked back. He hit the edge of the woods and the shadows swallowed him whole. It was as if the forest had reached out a hand and pulled him into its pocket, leaving nothing but the sound of gravel settling and the distant lonely whistle of the wind. When you look at the terrain of the Penman Mine, you realize that running down that slope should have resulted in a broken neck. It is a graveyard of fallen timber and sharp rock, a place where every step is a gamble. Yet Terrence moved through it as if he were being pulled by an invisible wire. The search began almost immediately with the crew scrambled and the local authorities notified by the time the sun had dipped below the jagged horizon. They brought in the dogs, the helicopters with thermal imaging, and the men who have spent their lives tracking mountain lions in the brush. They found nothing. Not a footprint, not a shred of clothing from his jacket, not a single broken twig to indicate where a 160-pound man had passed through the undergrowth. The search dogs are what haunt me the most in these cases. These are animals trained to find a scent in a hurricane, yet when they got to the spot where Terrence was last seen, they went silent. They did not pick up a trail that led into the woods, and they did not find where he might have circled back. It was as if his biological signature had been erased the moment his boots hit the floor of the valley. The sheriff of Idaho County, a man who knows these woods like the back of his hand, was left scratching his head. He noted that the area is treacherous, filled with old mining shafts that have been covered by decades of pine needles and rot. But even if a man falls down a hole, he leaves a trail of broken brush behind him. Terrence left a void. His parents, Terrence Sr. and Valerie, were told their son had simply run away, a narrative that fits a police report but fails the test of reality. Why would a young man with a plane ticket home and a loving family suddenly decide to sprint into a wilderness that would surely kill him within 48 hours? He had no supplies, no water, and no winter gear. The nights in the Nez Perce National Forest in October drop well below freezing, and the wind howls through the canyons with a predatory chill. There is a specific kind of silence that happens in the woods when something is wrong, a weight in the atmosphere that makes the hair on your neck stand up. The crew felt it, the searchers felt it, and I suspect Terrence felt it before he took that final desperate leap. I have seen this pattern before, where a person suddenly experiences a burst of frantic energy and bolts away from safety. We call it the sprint. It is as if a switch is flipped in the brain, or perhaps something in the environment triggers a primal need to flee. But what was he fleeing from? There were 12 witnesses, and none of them saw a mountain lion or a bear. None of them saw a stranger lurking in the trees. They only saw Terrence running away from them as if they were the monsters, or as if something only he could see was beckoning from the tree line. The microscopic observation of the scene showed no blood, no signs of a struggle, just the radio sitting on the dirt like a tombstone for his former life. The local authorities eventually called off the search after 7 days of scouring the mountainside. They covered thousands of acres with drones and ground teams pushing through brush so thick a man has to crawl on his belly to pass. They found ancient trash from the mining days and the bones of winter killed elk, but they never found a trace of Terrence Woods Jr. It is as if the earth opened up and accepted him, then sealed the wound before anyone could look inside. The family remains in a state of perpetual grief, stuck in that horrible limbo where the heart refuses to accept what the mind cannot explain. They believe there is more to the story, that the production crew is hiding something, but the mystery feels much older and much darker than a simple cover-up. In these high-altitude disappearances, there is often a strange lack of physical evidence that defies the laws of physics. If a man runs through the woods, he loses skin cells, he snags his clothes on thorns, he leaves deep impressions in the damp soil. Terrence did none of this. He moved like a ghost through a physical world. Some researchers talk about the Oz effect, a phenomenon where the sounds of the forest suddenly cut out, leaving the victim in a sensory vacuum that leads to intense panic or a trance-like state. Is it possible that Terrence stepped into a pocket of the world where the rules are different? Where a cliff is not a barrier but a doorway? We are left with the cold facts of a warm body gone missing in a cold place. Terrence Woods Jr. is still out there, or at least what remains of him is tucked away in some crevice of the Idaho panhandle that the sun never reaches. The mountains do not care about our documentaries or our television schedules. They are vast, indifferent, and hungry. The case of Terrence Woods remains one of the most disturbing entries in the annals of the missing because of the sheer visibility of his exit. He did not vanish in the night while everyone was sleeping. He vanished in the broad light of evening, in front of a dozen pairs of eyes, running toward a fate that remains invisible to the rest of us. The silence in Idaho County is heavy these days. Every time a hiker goes out near the Penman Mine, they are walking over the ground where a young man took a turn into the unknown. There is no closure for the Woods family, only a lingering question that echoes in the empty spaces of their home. How does a man become a shadow in the span of 5 seconds? Why did he run? Until we understand the forces at play in these wild places, we are all just guests in a house that does not want us there. The forest is a hungry thing, and sometimes it does not even wait for you to get lost before it takes you. This case bears a chilling resemblance to the disappearance of Stephen Kubacki in 1978. Kubacki was cross-country skiing near Lake Michigan when he vanished, leaving behind only his skis and a set of footprints that simply stopped in the middle of a snowy field. Like Terrence, there was no sign of a struggle, no blood, and no explanation for how a human being could simply cease to leave a mark on the world. 10 months later, Kubacki woke up in a field, 700 miles away, with no memory of where he had been. Terrence Woods Jr. was not so lucky. He never woke up in another field, and he never came home to tell us what he saw in the shadows of the Penman Mine. There is also the case of Danny Filippidis, the firefighter who vanished from a ski resort in New York and ended up in California 6 days later, dazed and confused with no idea how he had crossed the continent. These incidents suggest a terrifying possibility that some people are subjected to a displacement we cannot comprehend. But in the rugged heart of Idaho, there are no highways to hitchhike on and no easy paths to follow. There is only the rock, the pine, and the terrifying speed of a man running toward his own end. We watch the tree line and we wait for answers, but the trees have a way of keeping their secrets buried deep beneath the roots. The air in Idaho County has a way of thickening before a storm. It is not just the moisture or the drop in barometric pressure. It is a weight, a physical presence that settles on the back of your neck like a heavy hand. In the shadow of the Penman Mine, the geography is a jagged mess of abandoned dreams and loose shale. This is where the earth was torn open for gold over a century ago, and the scars have never quite healed. The pines here are old, their branches tangled together in a desperate attempt to keep the light from reaching the forest floor. When you stand in those woods, you realize very quickly that you are not at the top of the food chain. There is a vibration in the ground, a low hum that you feel in your teeth more than you hear with your ears. It is a place that demands your full attention, and yet it is the last place on earth where you want to be noticed. Terrence Woods Jr. was 27 years old. He was a talented young man, a production assistant working for a London-based film company called Raw Television. They were out there on October 5, 2018, filming a documentary about the history of the mine. Terrence was a city kid, a professional, a man with a future that was supposed to happen in bright offices and on busy streets. He was not a hiker. He was not an outdoorsman. He was just a warm body in a very cold, very indifferent place. By 5:30 in the evening, the sun was already dipping behind the ridges, casting long skeletal shadows across the steep terrain. The crew was tired, the day was winding down, and the temperature was dropping toward the freezing mark. The witnesses say it happened in a heartbeat. Terrence was standing near the edge of a steep embankment, his radio clipped to his belt, his mind presumably on the next task or the warm meal waiting back at the base. Then something shifted. He did not stumble. He did not trip. According to the people standing right next to him, he simply dropped his radio and took off. He did not run toward the road or toward the safety of the vehicles. He ran down a near vertical cliffside with a speed that defied the laws of physics and the limitations of human bone and muscle. It was a sprint into the void, a frantic, silent dash toward the one place where no one could follow him. The crew watched in stunned silence as he descended the rocky slope. They shouted his name, their voices echoing off the granite walls, but he never looked back. He did not wave for help. He did not scream in terror. He just kept moving his legs, churning through the brush and the loose rock until the green canopy of the lower forest swallowed him whole. In the span of 5 seconds, a living, breathing human being had transformed into a ghost. The search began almost immediately, fueled by the adrenaline of a group of people who had just seen the impossible. But the forest did not give him back. The forest does not give anything back once it has decided to keep it. When the search and rescue teams arrived, they brought the best technology that money and taxes could buy. They brought thermal imaging drones that could spot a field mouse from 500 feet in the air. They brought bloodhounds with noses trained to find a scent in a hurricane. They brought hundreds of volunteers who combed through every inch of that drainage. They found nothing. No footprints. No torn clothing. No blood on the sharp rocks. It was as if Terrence had simply ceased to exist the moment his feet hit the bottom of that cliff. The dogs were particularly unnerving. They did not catch a trail and lose it. They acted as if there had never been a human being in that area at all, whining and pacing in circles, their hackles raised at a threat that the humans could not see. The Penman Mine is a place of deep subterranean voids. The ground is honeycombed, with shafts and tunnels, many of them unmapped and forgotten by time. Some people suggest that Terrence might have fallen into one of these hidden mouths, a vertical drop into the dark where his body would lay forever. But that does not explain the run. It does not explain why a rational, healthy man would abandon his life and his friends to sprint into the most dangerous terrain imaginable. There is a specific kind of madness that takes hold of people in these high, lonely places. Some call it mountain fever. Others call it something much older, a primal response to a predator that hunts not with claws but with the mind. I have spent years looking into these cases, and the details of the Woods' disappearance are a perfect match for the most disturbing patterns we see in the wild. There is the sudden, inexplicable burst of speed. There is the proximity to water or ancient geological formations. There is the total lack of physical evidence, despite a massive search effort. It is as if these people are being pulled by a magnet, a force that overrides their survival instinct and draws them into the dark. We like to think we are in control of our own bodies, but when the Woods decide they want you, your own legs might just carry you to your doom before your brain has a chance to object. Consider the case of Stephen Kubacki in 1978. He was a 23-year-old student cross-country skiing alone on the edge of Lake Michigan. He was experienced, fit, and well prepared for the cold. His tracks were found leading toward the water, a steady rhythmic trail in the deep snow. And then at the edge of the ice, the tracks simply stopped. There were no signs of a struggle. There was no hole in the ice where he could have fallen through. His skis and his poles were found neatly placed on the ground, but Stephen was gone. He was a missing person for 15 months, a name on a cold case file that everyone assumed ended in a watery grave. But then, 15 months later, Stephen Kubacki woke up in a field in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, 700 miles away from where he had vanished. He was wearing clothes that were not his own, carrying a backpack he did not recognize. He had no memory of the last year of his life. He felt as though he had simply closed his eyes in Michigan and opened them in Massachusetts. This is what we call a displacement. It is a glitch in the reality of the wilderness, a moment where the physical laws of our world seem to bend or break. If Stephen had not reappeared, he would be just another statistic, another Terrence Woods, a shadow lost in the white noise of the map. Then there is Danny Filippidis, the firefighter who disappeared from Whiteface Mountain in New York in February of 2018. He was on a ski trip with his friends, a man who knew how to navigate dangerous environments and stay calm under pressure. He told his friends he was going to get his phone from the car, and he never came back. 6 days later, Danny was found in Sacramento, California. He was still wearing his ski boots. He was still wearing his helmet and his goggles. He was dazed, confused, and had no idea how he had traveled nearly 3,000 miles across the continent in less than a week. He had a haircut he did not remember getting. He had a new cell phone he did not remember buying. These are not just stories of people getting lost. These are accounts of people being taken, moved, and sometimes discarded. In the case of Terrence Woods, the displacement seems to have been permanent. He did not wake up in a field in another state. He did not call his family from a payphone in a distant city. He vanished in front of witnesses, a terrifying demonstration of how thin the veil really is. When you are out there in the Idaho Panhandle, you are walking on the roof of something very large and very hungry. The Penman Mine is not just a hole in the ground. It is a monument to the things we are willing to ignore in our search for wealth and progress. The search for Terrence was eventually scaled back, as all searches are. The helicopters stopped flying, the volunteers went home to their warm beds, and the forest settled back into its heavy, suffocating silence. The official reports will tell you that he is a missing person, likely deceased due to the elements. They will use words like psychological break or accidental fall. But the people who were there, the ones who saw him run, they know the truth. They saw the way he moved. They saw the way the shadows seemed to reach out for him before he even reached the tree line. They know that whatever happened to Terrence Woods Jr., it was not an accident. We are left with the silence. It is a silence that stretches from the mountains of Idaho to the shores of Lake Michigan and the peaks of the Adirondacks. It is a pattern of disappearance that defies conventional logic and mocks our sense of security. We build our cities and we pave our roads and we think we have tamed the world. But the wild places are still there and they are still governed by rules we do not understand. Sometimes the woods don't wait for you to get lost. Sometimes they just reach out and take you while your friends are watching, leaving behind nothing but a radio on the ground and a question that will never be answered. Every time a hiker steps off the trail near the Penman Mine, they are stepping into a territory that does not belong to them. They are walking over the ghost of a man who ran toward his own end with a speed that was not human. The Woods family still waits for news, still looks at the phone every time it rings, hoping for the impossible. But in the rugged heart of Idaho, the only thing that answers is the wind. The trees keep their secrets buried deep beneath the roots, and the mountains continue their long indifferent watch over the empty spaces where men used to be. We are all just guests in a house that does not want us there, and the forest is always hungry. The patterns suggest that Terrence Woods is part of a much larger, much darker narrative. Like the case of Keith Reinhardt, who vanished in Silver Plume, Colorado after telling friends he was going to walk into the mountains and never come back, there is a sense of predestination in these exits. Reinhardt's body was never found despite him being in an area that was heavily searched. Or the disappearance of Jared Atadero, whose clothing was found years later on a ledge that was physically impossible for a child to reach. These are the markers of something anomalous, something that operates outside the boundaries of our understanding. Terrence Woods Jr. is not just a missing person, he is a warning. He is a reminder that the world is much larger and much stranger than we are willing to admit, and that sometimes the light of evening is just as dangerous as the dead of night.